at most, like there's probably about $100 million spent on like all efforts towards like safety and policy and governance of AI systems that are more advanced.
You know, they're looking at the timelines, they're looking at the trajectories of everything, and they're like, we can widen this gap. We'll take them dollar figures and let them keep spreading apart. Like it seems absolutely insane. But these are corporate finance meetings where they're sitting around figuring out where to spend the bucks, and I guess just safety doesn't have a voice at that table.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I mean, safety, to the extent it does, often will be focused on like, more like mundane concerns, and not to say that there aren't like real risks in the present, to be clear, but I think, they're not thinking about these like sort of like existential catastrophic concerns. And I think, I mean, for comparison, like Jeffrey Hinton, right, like the most celebrated like AI safety scientists out there, says that ratio should be about 50-50. So 50% making sure that these systems are safe, and 50% on like actually building them, which just like shows how out of whack we are, where it's like more than 100 times to
Right. And I hear him say 50-50, and I'm like, is that if they started at an even start? Like now where one is way ahead, it would almost seem you'd need to be like 20-80 to be anywhere reasonable.
Right. And also like on that number as well, on the how much is committed to like safety stuff. Like I think I wrote that in like sort of late 2023 when OpenAI was like, we're going to commit 20% of our resource to like safety. And like subsequently, as we found out, like that is a very watered down commitment. So even I would guess like that was me being optimistic on the 100 million. Like that's like much less than those capabilities. So.
And so, what is the real world impact of that funding delta? Like what, we can look at it, and I don't work in an AI lab. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. That sounds ridiculous. There's no way the $1 could ever do anything to the 250. But like, what does it really do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just means there are like many promising like organizations, many promising people who are like earnestly trying to make this like problem better, who just can't do that work because they need pay, they need like salary, they need support. We're talking about like people who are working with governments, small civil society like think tanks up against like billion-dollar companies who are like heavily lobbying them. It means like these people who are like doing this like technical safety work are in like the dozens.
Welcome to For Humanity, an AI Risk Podcast, episode number 51, AI Risk Reduction Funding, the truth about big tech versus small safety. I'm John Sherman, your host. Thank you so much for joining me. For Humanity is the AI Risk Podcast for the general public. No tech background required. This show is solely about the threat of human extinction from artificial intelligence. Please like, share, subscribe, donate, leave a comment. We need all that to trick the algorithm into getting more folks like you to watch this show. Here's where we are at. Fewer than 2,000 people are making machines with the potential to kill the rest of the 8 billion of us here on Earth. That's where we're at. They don't understand how these machines work. They do not know how to control them. And all they do is make them stronger, not safer. And they openly admit all of this. Just listen to this conversation last year between AI luminaries, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang and Ilya Sutskever.
I'd like to take a small detour and to give an analogy that will hopefully clarify why more accurate prediction of the next word leads to more understanding, real understanding. Let's consider an example. Say you read a detective novel. It's like a complicated plot, a storyline, different characters, lots of events, mysteries like clues, it's unclear. Then, let's say that at the last page of the book, the detective has gathered all the clues, gathered all the people, and saying, okay, I'm going to reveal the identity of whoever committed the crime. Mm-hmm. And that person's name is...
Predict that word.
Exactly.
Yeah. My goodness.
Right?
Yeah, right.
My goodness, he says. Whatever will they do? Dear Jensen, your black leather jacket will not protect you from AGI, dude. Here's the raw truth. Big tech has hundreds of billions of dollars behind the kill all life on Earth machines. And the other side is mainly made up of people like me, volunteers doing things with their own time and money, trying to stop big tech's global omnicide plot. So this week, a look at the stark reality of AI risk reduction funding. Our interview is with Tom Barnes, an applied researcher at the Founders Pledge, an organization aiming to spend tech founders' donations on reducing catastrophic risks and working to figure out some of the basic big communication protocols around AI risk and safety. It is important work. Here is my interview with Tom Barnes. Tom.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you, good. Can you hear me okay on this?
I can. You sound good. Can you hear me, see me, everything?
Everything's coming good from here, yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome. Great to meet you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you too.
So I always like to start out with just sort of, a little bit of bio. So, just tell me sort of like how you got involved in all this stuff. And I'm also curious, you are a younger man than I, but you are, I'm curious how you got involved in this at such a young age. So, tell me.
Yeah, sure thing, yeah. So I think probably around about 4 years ago when I first came across a lot of this like AI arguments around like, existential risk, catastrophic risks. When I was back in sort of like university, like maybe, 19, 20 years old, thought, wow, this is like a really big deal, really big problem here. And then, when I graduated, I joined Founders Pledge, which is where I currently work. I've been there for 3 years now. And so, in brief, like Founders Pledge, we're a community of like tech entrepreneurs. About 2,000 people now have signed a pledge to give money to charity. There's over $10 billion pledged now, and essentially we're helping to advise like tech entrepreneurs to like donate effectively. And so my role here has been like thinking, especially when it comes to AI, like what are like the most effective like ways to like reduce these risks.
Sure. Okay. And so let's just back up just a little bit. So you're 19, 20 years old. You learn about this for the first time, and just tell me about the, even the emotional side of it. Like, how did you deal with the size and scope of this weight that you carry, that I carry, that we all carry?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think initially quite skeptical. I think like, this is kind of wild, this is kind of like crazy, like, is this really true? And I think, I did initially think like, this is like, I buy all these arguments, but I think it took the time reading through really thinking about these problems and seeing how many others some are, like, people who like thought about this problem deeply. I thought like, wow, like there's something here. And like, I'm still not like totally bought on like, this is gonna like be terrible. It's more just like,
right.
Even some chance is like scary enough, like.
Right. I mean, that is a crazy thing about the whole thing is like nobody's saying this is certainly going to happen. We're just saying the risks are too great.
Exactly.
And I think, that can get lost in a little bit. Okay. So you graduate from college and then tell me about Founders Pledge. So you go to work there. What's going on with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as I mentioned, like Founders Pledge, we're like a community of like tech entrepreneurs, startup founders. And basically, over 1,800 people now have signed this pledge to say they want to give like money when they like, like sell their company, and they want to like pledge to give that to charity. So I think to date, it's something like $10 billion have been pledged now by these like founders. So extremely generous. And so our role at Founders Pledge is essentially to really help them like fulfill that pledge and make sure it like does the most good it possibly can, have the greatest impact. And so our members like come from a wide range of places. They're coming from Europe, from US, from Asia, and they're often very interested in different problems. They're not just AI; they're interested in global health and global development, climate change, many sort of global issues. But increasingly, I think AI is becoming more and more like in the tops of minds of these people and like some of these risks. So that's where I come in, and our role is to like really try and support them in like where are the most effective places. Yeah.
And so do they just sort of give to a fund that gets allocated to different places, or do the different founders sort of align their interests directly with their giving? And they're like, I care about AI risk, so I'm going to give to this thing related to that.
Yeah, it can be like a range of those. So sometimes our members are like very happy to sort of defer and trust us, and they'll give to some of our funds. So we have like 4 different like funds. We have a global catastrophic risks fund in particular, which is relevant to the AI work, and so that like we have expert grant makers who can really sort of like find the most effective opportunities there. Other times they're more excited to give directly to some of the organizations we recommend, so they'll go direct to those charities, and we'll help them to sort of like find them, set up those calls and conversations. I think, I say, people come in with very different perspectives. We do many things beyond AI, but my main focus over the last sort of 18 months has been like, where are those most exciting places to like really make a difference here?
Amazing. Amazing. And what would you say the interest level is in AI risk stuff from these founders? You know, it's certainly an interesting group of people, tech founders. I like to say that being rich doesn't really matter if we're all dead. So, you know, but I've been surprised, I think, at how ineffective that argument is, or just how sort of the wealthy of the world also have this constancy bias where they just believe that like tomorrow is going to be like today, and you know, that's the world we're living in. So tell me about the general sort of attitude of the founders to AI risk.
Yeah, I mean, again, it definitely varies. On the one end, we definitely have some of those members who are really bought into this stuff. They really get it. They're like really like passionately motivated to like try and like tackle these problems. Others who have often maybe bounced off this arguments or like haven't heard them like properly yet, and or just like aren't like personally like feeling it yet. I emphasize yet because I think like over the coming years we might see that change. And like a few years ago, it really was a very small number of people who even thought about this stuff. But obviously, it's becoming more mainstream. My guess is that as these like AI systems get more and more advanced, people will wake up more and more. And so like our job then is to really help them say like, don't freak out. Like this is big, but also like we can help. We can really help you find those most effective places for you. So you don't have to like, lie too much in bed at night thinking about this stuff.
Sure. You don't have to get specific if you don't want to, but like, are there one or two or three sort of things that AI risk efforts that have been funded that you want to talk about that might be of interest to the audience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think on our website we list some like the top recommended organizations that we think we should be funding, and we talk a little bit like about why we recommend those. So to give like one example, there's like this think tank in the UK, like Centre for Long-Term Resilience. And they're like working really, really closely with like UK government to sort of like really help them like generate sensible policy ideas, sensible regulations, and they're really sort of like really closely connected to the government, really helping to support this. But like many organizations here, this is like civil society, this is non-profits. They don't have like big tech donors like sort of or big tech companies sort of like lobbying hard. Really, they're pushing back against that. And so, like they've really been successful despite that on a relatively small budget to like have a meaningful difference on like how the UK is like approaching this issue. I think another organization we sort of recently supported is like Far AI. They do like a lot of like technical side of the research. So really thinking about like how do we actually like make sure these systems are aligned and safe and controllable and robust. And in particular, as a side project of that, they've also been working a lot with like scientists in China and like specialists there, and had a lot of like very good dialogues between like US and Chinese like AI scientists. And the upshot is like they're worried about this in China too, and like they've really been helped to like bring that to the table and really make this point. But this is not something where like the US has to sort of race against China, because there's actually a lot of agreement here. So those are just like a few sort of that come to my mind. But on our website we've got like a whole list of like different exciting, promising organizations.
Awesome, very cool. And you hear a lot, or the sort of accelerationist types like to push this narrative that it's the AI risk realists like you and I who are super well funded, and it's the tech companies that are fighting back against these dominant doomers. What is the reality of the funding picture for risk realists and risk deniers?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite staggering, honestly. If there's lots of money, I haven't seen it for people who are worried about these risks. I think at most, like, there's probably about $100 million spent on like all efforts towards like safety and policy and governance of AI systems that are more advanced.
And in what time period is that? In the history of the world, or like?
I think that's a rough estimate of like maybe 2023. But for comparison, in 2023. There's something like $25 billion, so 250 more times the resource going into like building these systems. So 250 times more for making them capable, and $1 for making it safe. And like that is getting like that ratio is getting worse and worse. I would expect 2024 it's more extreme. 2025 is predicted being more extreme with like this AI hype. And meanwhile, there's people thinking like, wait, is it safe? Is it controllable? It's a very small fraction. And if you take out a couple of like most like major donors in this space, we're probably talking like less than 10 million if you take out a couple of individuals. So it really is like a pretty strange neglected space.
How do those meetings actually go down where they're sort of like, they're looking at the timelines, they're looking at the trajectories of everything, and they're like, we can widen this gap. We'll take them dollar figures and let them keep spreading apart. Like, it seems absolutely insane. But these are corporate finance meetings where they're sitting around figuring out where to spend the bucks. And I guess just safety doesn't have a voice at that table.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I mean, safety, to the extent it does, often will be focused on more like mundane concerns, and not to say that there aren't like real risks in the present, to be clear, but I think they're not thinking about these like sort of like existential catastrophic concerns. And I think, I mean, for comparison, like Jeffrey Hinton, right, like the most celebrated AI safety scientists out there, says that ratio should be about 50-50. So 50% making sure that these systems are safe, and 50% on like actually building them, which just like shows how out of whack we are, where it's like more than 100 times to gap.
Right. And I hear him say 50-50, and I'm like, is that if they started at an even start? Like now where one is way ahead, it would almost seem you'd need to be like 20-80 to be anywhere reasonable.
Right. And also like on that number as well, on the how much is committed to like safety stuff. Like I think I wrote that in like sort of late 2023 when OpenAI was like, we're going to commit 20% of our resource to like safety. And like subsequently, as we found out, like that is a very watered down commitment. So even I would guess like, that was me being optimistic on the 100 million. Like that's like, much less than just capabilities. So.
And so what is the real world impact of that funding delta? Like what, we can look at it, and I don't work in an AI lab. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. That sounds ridiculous. There's no way the $1 could ever do anything to the 250, but like, what does it really do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just means there are like many promising like organizations, many promising people who are like earnestly trying to make this like problem better, who just can't do that work because they need pay, they need like salary, they need support. We're talking about like people who are working with governments, small civil society like think tanks up against like billion-dollar companies who are like heavily lobbying them. It means like these people who are like doing this like technical safety work are in like the dozens rather than like the thousands of people who are like working on this stuff. Many of the people you've had on this podcast, I'm sure like thinking about this stuff, but they like need that support. Like the funding is like essential for this to actually happen. And like as I say, the distribution is so strange that like it's very, very small community relative to the number of people who are building these like massive systems.
So you also do technical research, is that right? Or you have some familiarity with technical research?
We make some recommendations on like technical safety work. Yeah.
Is it true that from a developer's perspective, safety work is super lame compared to capabilities work? I've heard that like, if let's say it's a restaurant, the chef who's doing all the really cool stuff is doing the capability stuff, and chopping lettuce is like the safety work. Is that true?
I think it probably depends on who you ask and like taste. I mean, I think like the safety stuff is super interesting. I mean, like one like sort of key like stream is like interpretability work, which like for example is like really trying to figure out like what are like let's be honest, like very impressive magical systems, and like really getting into like how do they actually work?
Yeah,
like, what is going on?
What the hell's going on in there?
Yeah, like, and that's like a really interesting question as a scientific exploration. Like I want to know like, how is this magical like ability coming out of like what is just like a very basic sort of algorithm? Like how does that work?
Yeah,
that's like a fascinating question to my mind. I mean, cracking the true nature of intelligence and like figuring out how we can like apply that safely. This seems like brilliant. I'm not qualified enough myself to tackle these questions, but there are some brilliant minds out there who certainly can. But again, like can't do it if it's not going to pay nearly as much as the companies will for 10 times the salary to build them without thinking about like if they're safe.
Right. Has there been any progress in interpretability? Any like notable progress?
So again, I'm like probably not the best person to ask on this, but I think Anthropic has done some pretty like solid work and sort of like reputable work there. So there are like positive signs, but like from my understanding is like it's way further off than what we need to like understand like the current cutting edge right now in terms of like how capable the systems are. So there's positive signs, but again, it won't happen by default unless there's like investment and the people willing to do it.
And on the funding imbalance, safety versus capabilities development, are there any strategies to change this, to get it going back towards each other, to keep it from spreading apart? Like, is there any, could the government come in and say, this is a mandate, or, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe the optimistic spin here is something like it's something we can all do about. Like there's like sometimes this stuff feels very like alien and abstract, and you have to be really smart, technical, but like everyone can donate a little bit of money, right? And I know it feels like small amounts, but in the grand scheme of things, everyone has like some ability. Of course, like philanthropists and like millionaires and billionaires have more capacity, but like everyone can do something here. So I think that's the first strategy. And then secondly, we also do have governments, as you say, and they are investing lots in like research and development. If that can be like leveraged towards like safety R&D, that would be fantastic. Some governments have made signs of that already, and then the private companies as well, if they can be like mandated or regulated to say, hey, look, just like even a small fraction of your budget should be going to these issues as well.
Right. I don't know anything about other industries that do super dangerous stuff, but I would have to imagine there's some sort of parallels to like the government mandating. I don't know if the government says to airplane manufacturers, like, you have to spend X on safety or something, but I have to imagine they're not just like fully hands off, like, just put your plane in the air and we'll see what happens.
Right. I think, yeah, my guess is something like there's a mandate to like, you have to follow certain protocols and requirements. And to do that, you need money. You need to like make sure there are people on the ground who are like employed to check these things. And again, that needs money. So I think whenever you look at it, like if it's like directly mandating particular resource like allocation, or if it's just you have to follow certain rules and comply with them, either way, like there is a requirement there for like some investment in safety there.
Yeah. All right. So here's something that's been in my head a little bit this week. Have you, Tom, been successful at convincing the people closest to you in your life, your friends and family, about AI risk?
Oh, interesting question. Yeah, there's certainly been some people who I've been like positively surprised by that they like seem to get it. I think more recently there is a realization that like this is going to be a big deal. Maybe not necessarily on the risks yet, but I certainly think realizing, wow, okay, like I thought ChatGPT was cool, but maybe it wasn't going anywhere. Maybe they've now seen like O1 and others like sort of seeing this is not slowing down and they're starting to get it. And then I think, yeah, the baseline expectation for most people is this is not going to go well, because like, for standard reasons that's not really unique to AI, like just like tech companies are building something that's going to make them massively profitable. People skeptical that this will like make them personally better. So I think like, yeah, I feel like I've had some success here, and the argument is fairly intuitive. I think especially on the kind of just like, imagine like your worst enemy having access to like super powerful technical like tools to like, maybe take over the world. That's like pretty obvious. If we ignore that, like maybe AI systems themselves would try and take over, like the capacity for misuse is pretty intuitive, I think.
And so you've been able to, because I find even with people in my life that like know what I'm doing and they know how I feel about these things, no one really owns it in the way that I do, or sort of like, I feel like has moved to the point of like beyond observing it, taking it in to like trying to do something about it or something like that. So like, have you found any effective strategies for, just sort of when you bring it up with someone in conversation right off the bat, what do you go for? How do you have that sort of first conversation of like, hey, would you like a coffee? Also, are you aware we all might die pretty soon?
Right. Yeah, I think I've avoided the strategy of going straight in there with like this might be like might be terrible. And I think really importantly it's like good to be like totally honest and straight with people, and always be like, look, I'm unsure, like this is my thinking, this is why I think this, but like smart people disagree about this. It's like don't expect you to like in one day like suddenly go like, oh my god, we're gonna die. Like firstly, because I don't believe this is certainly the case myself, but secondly, like it is like a complicated topic. So I think starting with the like basics, like AI systems are getting impressive, and that would be a big deal, and walking them through that stuff is I think like a pretty effective strategy. But again, like I don't want to like persuade, I want to like inform basically.
That's a really good way to think about it. I think I shift far too often to like, I will persuade you, you must be persuaded, but like just trying to inform, I think is maybe a more effective way to approach it. So you also deal with the British government. You have an advisory role with the British government on AI risk. Tell me about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, earlier this year, like I had the chance to like essentially go on to comment from Founders Pledge. So like take some time out, like a few months from FP, and then go off to the UK government, which was a very like interesting time. So we just had at the end of last year the AI Safety Summit in the UK, which is like the first time a lot of these like companies and countries that got together and said, hey, look, like there is maybe an existential threat here from AI systems. Like although like many of the things I might like to see got watered down, like nonetheless, like there was agreement on that one fact that like, there is something to be looked at here. So that's very positive. So I joined very soon just after that. And a lot of the work was thinking, okay, like what are we going to do now as a UK government? So my particular role was on like risk assessment, thinking really like carefully, like transparently and impartially, like, okay, how likely are these risks? How bad are they if they occur? Everything from like misinformation and disinformation to people using ChatGPT to like cheating in exams, all of that sort of like stuff, right up to the like AI can like engineer bioweapons, AI can conduct massive cyber attacks, AI could even like take over itself. So across all of those, trying to assess how likely that is. And then the second component of my work, so the first on the assessment, the second component was on like actually preparing for that. So let's say like, I don't know, 2026, and an AI company's built a really scary, powerful AI model. Like, what do we do? Like, very practically, what is the concrete steps like the government should take to deal with that threat? Everything down to like, when should like the prime minister be woken up at 3 a.m. and told like, hey, this is a really big deal, or like not?
Okay, let's start with this because we just I just did a show with Buck at Redwood Research where he had a less wrong post about how this thing would basically just go to hell. Like, the guy in his first lab is like, we just got a report that a model is scheming. We're really worried about it. I will call the president. President, our model is scheming. We need to shut all the labs down. President calls the next head of the other lab, and the other lab's like, no, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We can't shut it down. It's fine. Whatever, blah, blah, blah. So, what are your thoughts about this unbelievably ridiculous process they have put out there that like we're going to notice something bad, blow a whistle, and all the countries and companies are just going to stop on a dime that day?
Yeah, no, that is like a really good question. I mean, that's the one thing I'm like, as you described, like would love to see, and like we're doing everything we can to get to that world because we're obviously not there right now. So essentially, yeah, like I often think this is like a lot of boring stuff, a lot of basic, simple, easy stuff. We're not talking about like cool, exciting, or difficult research. We're talking about like basically like who in OpenAI needs to email who in the UK government, and how do they escalate that up the chain of commands? How does that get to like center of government in the UK? Yes. And then if they get there, okay, now what? Like presumably the president's like, okay, shall we have a plan for this? Well, we need to write that plan in advance so that they can deal with it. They can't write the plan on the fly. They need to have a plan. And then they need to enact the plan, and people need to know the plan. And so like, a lot of this is like super basic stuff that we can do right now. And this doesn't need to like require technical evaluations or technical safety work. It doesn't require like detailed regulations. It just requires a basic process and protocol. And like very much a crisis kind of emergency response framing here, which is like, often we might not have a lot of time. OpenAI might be like, hey, we built this model, it's scary, and we're going to deploy it in a week. And government's like, should that be legal? Should that be allowed? If yes, like, how? If no, like, how do we stop them? Like, these are, basic questions.
And would that be the call? The call would be like, it's acting sketchy. We set a delivery date. You need to work with us over the next 6 days so we make sure we hit our delivery and that it's reasonably safe enough.
Who knows? It could be like this. I mean, one thing we did a lot is like thinking about really concretely what would those scenarios look like. So yeah, sometimes it's like the US company and they're thinking, we're going to deploy soon. Maybe they're more cooperative and they're like, hey, look, we build this model, but we like want to like make sure it's safe first. You got to think like, is it the US or is it the UK or is it the EU or is it China? Like, how do you process those different scenarios? Maybe the risks are different. Maybe it's like a bio risk, a cyber risk, and sort of takeover risk. Like, there's so many variations on this, but the core stuff is often very similar. The core stuff is like, no matter what the risk, no matter what the threat, like we need to get these basic stuff sorted first. And yeah, to go back to Buck's point, like a lot of the optimism is hopefully like, detect this stuff is scary, and then something, government deals with it. And that's the gaps we need to fill, really.
So how did that effort go to build out the binder of here's what we do?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I probably shouldn't like disclose like exactly government's plan.
You don't have to get specific, but like, were you successful in producing this process?
Yeah, no, I think there are signs of optimism. I think certainly, like, we went from a state of like no one thinking about this to like some thinking about this, some plans, some detail, and so that's like positive. And I think, yeah, excited to see like where that leads. Although, again, like the UK is seen as like a thought leader in the space, and like the UK is the only one I've seen doing this at all, and yet those plans were pretty basic. So, like we've got a long way to go. But I do think that there are like, yeah, signs of optimism, and my guess is that like if we get some kind of like warning shot or like early sort of like indication of these systems, then that will trigger a bunch of action. Like if you think about like terrorism as like another analogous case, like like it would have been really useful to be prepared for like these cases ahead in advance, and then when these crises hit, we knew exactly what to do. And that's what we're trying to be ready for AI now. Or the same with COVID, right? Like in 2019, it'd be really nice if we had some PPE stockpiled. It'd be really nice if we had some vaccine sort of production systems ready to go. Like all these basic stuff. Again, we knew in advance that that would be a problem, and we could have been ready for that. And so again, we want to be ready in the same way with AI. Obviously, the detail is different, but the fundamental is the same.
Right. And does the unknown nature of the outcome or the threat make that planning so much harder? Because I mean, I guess with a pandemic, it could be any variety of ways that it presents. But, how does the unknown nature of what will happen make it even harder to plan?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes it tough. And I like the adage like plans are useless, but like planning is essential, right? Like we shouldn't plan for like a particular scenario, but the very act of planning itself was very helpful. I think like the UK government, like when it was leaving the EU, did a bunch of like no deal planning. So like planning if like it crashed out of the EU without a deal, and like it didn't, but it turned out that was so helpful for the COVID response. Funnily enough, a completely different situation, but it was actually turned out quite helpful. And so I think like getting governments like institutional muscle ready for like this stuff is super essential, even if the threat is pretty unknown, even if we're pretty unsure and uncertain how this plays out. Like just having the basics is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, and something California's governor has talked about is what is a hypothetical threat. And in my head, I was like, if I'm in California, a hypothetical threat is like the next earthquake or the next forest fire. Like you have full departments and budgets and all kinds of stuff prepared for that. So like it's not like government is out of the business of hypothetical threats, but is that so? As you deal with it in the British government, does the fact that it is not a real today thing diminish its chances for success from governmental response?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately have to say I think yes. It is really frustrating to be like, again, it's like imagine in 2019 and saying, well, we think there might be this pandemic, and saying, oh, it hasn't happened for 100 years.
Totally.
So it's all hypothetical.
Pandemic was like a word they talked about on the news. It was like, pandemic. What is that? That's a news word.
And even like the worst damages of climate change in 2030, 2040, assuming AI isn't this big deal, like would in fact like, be seen as a hypothetical today. Like, oh, sure, you've like done all this climate modeling, you've done all this research and analysis, but like, where are like the massive extreme hurricanes and like thunderstorms?
Exactly. Like sea level rise is hypothetical.
Right. Until it's happened and then it's too late. And so it's like, it's hypothetical and then it's like too late. And there's like, you really convince people that like, no, right now is the time. And like the other note on the whole preparedness stuff is like, if we're wrong, if this stuff is way off or never happens at all, like there's not really much lost. There's not much cost here. Like we had these plans and preparedness if this event occurred and it didn't happen. Well, that's great. Like that's just like fantastic.
Right.
Like we're not really like stopping innovation. We're not stopping like all the positives that AI can bring. It's just saying if things take a turn for the worse, let's be ready. And so I think that's why it's not even that controversial in theory. In practice, the hypothetical thing does come up. But,
Do the companies and CEOs support efforts like this? And I mean genuinely.
Yeah, I think there are some who definitely do, and some who are on the fence, and some who don't. I mean, I think a positive sign is like this, like responsible scaling policies work that's been happening in like OpenAI and DeepMind and Anthropic. They've set out these like protocols that say, like, hey, like if we built a model that's like this capable, then we'll take these actions. So that's like great that they're thinking about it. The trouble is there's a lot of depth lacking, a lot of detail lacking, and this also relies on a bunch of like trust that the companies will actually fulfill their commitments. And like I won't even go into the OpenAI situation, but like I think it's quite clear that we should be skeptical that will happen. So yeah.
Is there trust is a great word. Is there any trust between the CEOs themselves? Like if something went squirrely at OpenAI and Sam calls Dario and says, you need to shut down now. And I can't even really take the time to detail why. You just need to do it. Is there any chance that they have enough trust with each other that it would happen?
It's a very, very good question. In theory, they have agreed that they will do that. They have in theory said, like, we will merge in the system, we will like help each other out. Like, if things get to a certain level, like, you know, we're going to stop racing, or we'll start like to like, you know, deal with this threat collaboratively.
Yeah.
In practice, my guess is this would not be fulfilled. Like, there is nothing like legally binding here. It's just a commitment, and like previous commitments around governance have like fallen through. So yeah, and this is even amongst like companies who are relatively close and agree on the risks, like OpenAI and Anthropic, like, you know, have a shared history. They know each other. There's some familiarity there. Like, if we start talking about like Meta or like, you know, companies in China, like it becomes much harder, of course, to like think about how that would happen. But so in theory, it will. In practice, my guess is it won't, and that's even among the like more optimistic cases.
And is it even possible? Is there even a list of like all the labs and all the people doing all the work that is of such a size that could be dangerous enough in all the countries that's like current and comprehensive, so you'd even know who you had to call? Like,
yeah, I don't know of like a pretty like tight database on this. I mean, like, hopefully there are people there who know the right people to call. I think another complication that comes here is like, because they are racing against each other, like they're very sensitive about sharing IP, and they're sensitive about sharing details of models. So like, if the UK is like, testing a model, they want to make sure that that's secure, and the other companies don't know about it, and then no one else gets out in the public. So yeah, the idea that on the one hand they want to be really secretive and like, you know, don't tell anyone else and their competitors what they're doing. On the other hand, that they'll like totally fold as soon as it gets really dangerous. Like, it seems unlikely to me.
People in government are have the specific purpose to like sniff out bullshit and like be like, this isn't real enough. Go back and do it again. This is not going to work. No. You know, like, you presented us a design for this building. Our experts say it's going to collapse on itself. We're not going to allow you to build this building. I don't feel like there's any of that with this stuff. I feel like it's a foreign language. It's a foreign concept. It's just so hard for them to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, and I think this gets like the heart, like institutionally, like at least in the UK government's case, of like challenges working in like a big bureaucracy, like on a very technical subject, where you essentially have like a lot of like generalists, like non-specialist people who are thinking about this risk for the first time, who are like changing jobs all the time, who might not like be particularly interested or specialize in this, who don't know how AI works. And so that makes them very liable to lobbying by these big tech companies who say, oh no, like, don't worry, like, we've done all the tests. Right. It's totally safe. Like, we're the experts. We know what we're talking about. Like, we've done the tests. Trust us. And like, unfortunately, it's really hard for the bureaucrats to push back because they don't know. They don't feel confident to say, hey, look, actually, that's bullshit. Like, it's really hard to make that.
It's like when your car's getting worked on by somebody. If you don't know about cars, they're like, this is what's wrong with it. You're like, okay, well, you're the car guy, so can you fix my car?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, you know, who are you to trust? Like, to trust. Like, it seems. Yeah, that's a real challenge. One positive sign here is like the UK has like the AI Safety Institute, which has hired a bunch of like really smart, like technical people who have come from these labs, who are concerned about these risks, who are saying, look, like, you know, we need to like figure these things out, and they can call BS like on these companies if they say things that just like flatly false. And so that can like really help guide like, you know, regulations and policies with like, you know, some like evidence base. And I think the US has also got AI Safety Institute now, and so like, you know, again, we can hopefully see this kind of technical expertise come in and really like guide these legislation and regulation in a way that's not going to like be given into lobbying.
Which country is doing the most effective job working on these problems? Is it Great Britain?
I think my guess would be yes. My assessment would be the UK is like, set up this like AI safety summit, first in the world on the topic, really brought global attention on it, set up this AI Safety Institute, put resource into it, the first in the world again, hired all these really smart people, and like, quite unusually for any government, was like explicit that this is going to be about catastrophic and existential risks. That's going to be the key focus, not just all risks, not just any normal government body. This is going to explicitly be on these frontier risks that are getting more extreme. So that was like, first. Now, one note I should say is like, just because government's making all these noises and sounds and money pouring into the issue doesn't mean it's going to solve the problem, right? Like, that's the first step, but it is a good step.
Right. And so, interestingly enough, if England is doing the best job, France is probably doing one of the worst jobs. And there you are, just looking at each other across the channel. Do you feel the effects of Jan LeCun's work in France and the madness that country is dealing with?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, like the juxtaposition there, like that. Yeah, France for some reason has like decided. I don't know if it's just like anti-British thing. It's like, well, if you're going to go safety, we're going to go the other way or something. But I think like and it comes through in really subtle ways. So when we had the AI Safety Summit in November last year, it became the AI Action Summit for early next year in France. And so safety slipped off the agenda. It was like 1 point out of several, and now it's not even like existential side is not even featuring. It's like very like subtle wordplay to like really say, it's like one thing, but it's not the main thing. Plus, Jan LeCun, of course, is like quite skeptical here. And then we have like companies like Mistral and others who like lobbied the French government pretty hard to be like, hey, like let's build like the European version of like OpenAI. Let's do it. Let's like invest in open source. Like they've been really lobbying hard on this. And then there are like weird other sort of institutional like historical reasons. Like the UK is like historically had a lot of like AI safety people working there. France not so much. So I think these like factors do culminate in the UK having this unusual lead and France being unusually like sort of skeptical.
Here's a crazy one. I have a full issue with the term AI safety. Like, I think it is the wrong term, the wrong brand. And I've struggled to find what's better, but I think AI risk is better because I just feel like AI safety doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so every time we say it, we're putting it into the universe that like AI safety is a thing. AI safety is a dream. AI safety is a goal, and I know it's how it started and the cat's out of the bag and it's really hard to put all that back in there. But you have any thought like, I just feel like words are really important and branding is really important. And, the brand we have is saying something that doesn't exist.
Right. I think that's a really good point. I mean, like, I know nuclear safety, nuclear weapon safety doesn't really feel like it's appropriate. We talk about nuclear weapons risks, like, this is a kind of category. So yeah, I think there is definitely this kind of like, implicit assumption that you can build safe AI like easily and cheaply. And then the other thing is like that word AI safety used to mean existential risks and is increasingly used for all risks or, all things that are safe. Like, the way you might build a normal product safely. And it's like, well, we're talking quite a different type of thing to like, we're not talking about like kids' toys. We're talking about like, like existential safety, really. Like,
yeah. So Tom, you do a lot of stuff that deals with a lot of practical, real approaches to this thing, dealing with government, all this kind of stuff. Do you ever think to yourself, the timelines are too dire? All of this governmental approach is going to be too slow, too muted, too whatever. And we actually just really need to go sit out in traffic and like shut the whole world down, and use, very different tactics than are currently being used.
Yeah, I am sympathetic to the people who take that view. I mean, I'm not there yet myself, but I think I can totally see why someone might feel like that. I guess my response is something like, if we want to like shut down like AI development, like still the government's the only way we can do that plausibly, and like to shut it down to actually get that successfully done, like to be on the streets, to advocate. Like the plan is something like advocate, protest, whatever, for governments to do something. And the question is what? And like, even the most like skeptical, most like doom-ridden person must like think like, okay, but what do we do now? And that has to be answered.
Right.
And so like I go back to the basic stuff, the protocols, like let's get that fixed first. And that's a pretty popular position no matter who you are, because you might just say, well, in 2 years or 1 year the risks are too high and we should lock down. And someone might say in 50 years the risks are going to be occurring, so we shouldn't worry yet. But either way, like if they happen, there's a big question about what we're going to then do, and that's my focus.
And how would you take that? My sort of go-tos, if you said, what, if I was the president, what are the first two things I would do? It's straight Eliezer, but it's like two simple things: hard compute cap and track the chips. The chips have a reporting back device, hardware device on them that shows where they are, and they have to report back every minute or whatever it is. You can see if someone is building a data center that's not approved. How hard are those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely do those things. I mean, compute governance seems like an obvious like thing that, yeah, again, like doesn't necessarily have to believe that this is going to like need to be used right now, but like merely being able to track and monitor what's happening seems like an obvious like necessary step. So I think, yeah, I think we can get there, but I think again, the way to get there is like making this like feel possible for policymakers, make it feel like yes, this is the thing we can do and we should do, and on like the we should do, there is the question about how big these risks are, and that we can do is like okay, but how? So I think like a lot of this topic is like, how likely are these risks? How bad is this? But I really want to focus on like, okay, if you believe that, then what should you do? So make that feel a lot easier. It's a lot more in in grasp, because like people who are like really like worried need to have that clear answer when they're talking to someone in policy. Like, okay, you want to track the chips? How exactly? What exactly is needed? And the easier you make that for a policymaker, the clearer the ask, the more likely it is to be like successful, I think.
Sure. And let's go to tracking the chips specifically. How would that actually go down? Like, would the chip makers have to be on board for this? Do they have a position on it? How hard would it be to remake the assembly line so that it's putting this hardware on the chips? Like, what, how real is this?
Yeah, so I think like this is probably a good question for like US government in particular, because the US government just has such a like overarching like influence over the chip supply. So you have like the Chips Act, which like essentially prevents like export of chips to like China, along with like other measures. And I think like there is like specialism and expertise in like chip design and chip monitoring and chip export controls there. I think the next step is just like, okay, let's like tweak the design so we make sure that like monitoring is possible on said chips. I think like UK government is like not at the table there. I think the US is the one that really has to take the lead on that. I'm not like a compute governance expert myself, but there are people who are like smart people in think tanks in Washington DC, like thinking like what that might look like in practice. But they need to like again make that like clear to the policymakers, and hopefully they can like take these risks, realize why this is an important solution, and then actually enact it.
Sure. And I don't know how much you know technically about chip manufacturing. It's probably certainly more than I know, but it's like I know that these chip fabs take a really long time to get online and get right, and it seems like it is highly complex work. So it would be a terrible answer if they were like, yes, we've all agreed we're going to put something in the chips to track them. And they were like, perfect. It'll take us 4 years to get these assembly lines refit to add that capability.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to do it really now, because it's going to take several years to really like filter through like the supply chain to really like actually be used. And so like I think like the stopgap measure right now is not necessarily like monitoring specifically the chips, but just like monitoring like entire like compute clusters. So like seeing if there's like an energy spike, knowing like, and it goes back to like basic monitoring, basic like reporting by companies saying like, hey, we're going to build this model that's going to be this size with this capability, like expected capability and this much compute, and like making government aware of those basic facts alone is going to be essential, because then the government might say, hey, like that's quite a big model. That's going to have a lot of capabilities, and you don't know if it's safe. So maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe you should like take some mitigations. That you can do now, immediately. What's more longer term is actually like verifying that with like secure chips and being able to shut them down. That's like the step we need. But like the first thing you can do is at least report them.
Crazy question. Do you think the labs view the potential danger of a model as a asset? Like, as in, if it's not scary enough, it's not pushing it hard enough. It's not new enough. It doesn't, when they look at a new model and they're like, it's pretty dangerous. The boss like, good job, Bill. That shows you we're getting there.
Yeah, I think that is totally true. And I think this is my biggest worry about a lot of this evaluations work. A lot of people want to test and evaluate models, and I think, sure, that seems great, but like, what are you actually testing for? Like, let's say you're testing an AI model and say, like, is it really capable of like producing like, biological research to like maybe engineer new, pathogens? Is it really capable of like accelerating progress in AI research itself? Like, can it like have that recursive self-improvement? Like, you test these models and your result is like, yes, you can. You go to the company and you're like, hey, like, we found that your model is really scary, it can do all these things. And the company's gonna be like, yeah, I know, we planned that, we wanted to do that, we wanted to build this really capable general like intelligence that like could go on to super intelligence. That was the point. And I really worry that this like whole focus on evaluations is saying like exactly how capable are these models when we're missing the bigger picture here, which is like, of course they're going to be scarily capable. That was their intention. The point was that if they are going to build such systems, we need to know what we're going to do next. So yeah, I'm a little skeptical for that reason.
Do you have any insight into the brain of a human who works at a company where the boss says the work you're doing has a 25% chance of killing all life on Earth, and you come back to work the next day?
Yeah, I guess they, I don't know. I mean, the really cynical answer is like they're just like interested in like short term, selfishly, like money and profit, and maybe slightly less cynically they'll say, oh well, like oh sure, 25% of this really terrible thing, but 75% of this positive stuff, and I'm going to just focus on that. Maybe the other side is something like, well, sure, like 25% if we build it, but like if the other guys build it, it's going to be 50%. So actually, if we build it, it will be safer than them. And this like argument plays out time and time again. Like I think it's a very much a false dichotomy. OpenAI says if we don't build it, then like Meta will build it. Meta will say if we don't build it, then China will build it. China says if we don't build it, then OpenAI will build it. Like you just get this like cycle, and time and time again, everyone agrees that this is a risk. Which what does that tell you? It tells you that everyone is scaring each other rather than like actually like thinking sensibly here. Like if everyone agrees there's a risk of the other person building it, maybe we should just like have a chat and be like, why don't we not do that? Which is again quite a simple need.
It's like such like mental pretzelery. Like it's like twisted beyond twisting. If if a founder believed that the danger was real, it would be real for them too, not just real for their competitor, right? Like it's like that guy could really screw this up, but I got this.
Yeah, I think it's the arrogance, it's the like confidence, like oh we'll be fine, we'll be fine. And I think like this has happened in history, right? Like with nuclear weapons and Manhattan projects, the logic was like, well, we got to build this because the Nazis will build this, and it's like okay, fine, maybe. As it turned out, the Nazis were not nearly
right.
close to building it. Then it was, oh, we have to use it to stop Japan, and it was going to save lives. And then it was like, oh, now we have to massively increase our nuclear stockpile because the Soviets. So like this like imagined like enemy, this adversary, just kept changing. But, like, and the logic was always we have to build it or someone else will build it. And like like right. We hear all the time today, like exactly this. So yeah,
like when we launched the 2000th nuclear missile, that's when we'll gain advantage. Let's build more and stick them in mountains. Like,
yeah, the logic is like, wild, and I think like what's really frustrating is like that was the first time, and okay, like we really messed up on that one. Like we were in a war with nuclear weapons, like we messed up the coordination there. We didn't need to do that, but like now we're doing this again. Like we didn't learn the lesson, right? We didn't realize like what the problem with that was. Like we were racing to build this system, this like weaponry that was like unsafe, caused catastrophe, and we didn't need to do that. We could have worked together and coordinated to prevent that in the first place. And now we're doing exactly the same problem again. This is where like like what is it like? First a tragedy, then a fast, right? Like this is exactly where we're at now.
Yeah, and warning shot is certainly a scary prospect, but it is also something that like I'm like I don't want people to die. I don't want anything bad to happen. But the idea of something limited bad happening that wakes everyone up to something unlimited bad happening seems useful. Do you have any thoughts about warning shots, maybe, and even just, if you have in your head what might be the most likely potential way that might go down?
Yeah, it feels like strange saying the word optimism here, but yeah, I guess I am optimistic that if we got some kind of incident, that like hopefully this would inspire some more action. I mean, in some sense, we had a warning shot of a kind already, which is like the release of ChatGPT and a lot of subsequent like hype around it. Of course, it didn't cause harm, and that's fantastic, but like it woke the world up in many respects, so that was great. Yeah, I don't know what any concrete like tangible examples might look like. It might look like massively driven like AI misinformation and disinformation, AI persuasion. It might be like AI causing like financial frauds, cyber attacks. Like there are so many like, I don't want to say small scale because it's already like pretty large harms, but there are all these harms that and might occur. And the key thing to force people's minds on is like, look at the trajectory, look at how this is getting worse, not better. And I think that's going to be critical. And my other point on like preparedness is like, we should be prepared now, knowing that this is going to happen, and have a clear, policy, recommendation ready at that time to say, look, like this can't carry on, and be clear what's needed, rather than just like sort of wasting that opportunity.
Yeah, my biggest concern about warning shots is that we've already had a bunch, and we're going to have more, and no one's going to recognize them for what they are. Like, which safety team quitting OpenAI saying it's not safe and I need to leave is the warning shot?
Right.
Which one isn't the warning shot? Like,
yeah, it's kind of, it's because it's like we're kind of frogs boiling in water here. It's like very slowly getting worse, and you have little trickles of like more resignations, more problems, more like concerns.
Yeah.
And like it is quite unsafe on the one hand to have like this like sudden spike in capability. Like that is like quite concerning. On the other, it's very clear like what happens. Whereas if you have this continuous like improvement, continuous risks occurring, you actually like conversely society does not wake up. So even though that on the technical side it's probably safer, on the policy response it's much less clear when you should say, right, that's a step too far. I mean, again, with climate change, right, like climate change is not a distinct event. It's like the continuous increase of CO2, and that is going to like sort of slowly as a slow rolling catastrophe, whereas a pandemic, a nuclear war, it's pretty clear like when that starts, and what you need to do. So yeah, I do worry about that in short, and I think like we need to really set some very, very clear, commonly agreed like red lines where we say like you can do this, if this AI model can do this, like then we have to act. And being ready again in advance of that, saying if this red line is passed, then we will take these actions, and really like fleshing that out is going to be important now, not later.
Do you have any thoughts about the role of journalism in this? I have been depressed about how poorly journalism is handling this situation. I was a journalist, and like, so when you're a reporter, like if you're a general assignment reporter, like you do one thing one day and another thing the other day, and you sort of become like a expert in a variety of things at like the thinnest veneer level. But this thing, you can't really talk about at the thinnest veneer level. Like to understand it, you really have to have some depth to your understanding. And so it requires like a journalist to, when dealing with this issue, deal with life differently than they deal with their job on every other day. When it's like, I've got this, I know what I'm, like we're just getting up and doing the thing we do. This thing is totally different. And I think journalism writ large is totally dropping the ball on this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I can imagine, specializing in a particular subject is hard, especially if you're like just like a day-to-day reporter. Of course, if you're doing investigative stuff, sure, you can go a bit deeper, but yeah, it is hard. I mean, I'm like really excited that you're doing this podcast, that like people are talking about this now in like a more general sense. Like I think this has been a long time coming, and I'm really happy that you're doing this. I think like the other positive side is, of course, like people do pay attention to journalism like a lot. Like I know in government, I feel like a lot of like policy direction, like for better or for worse, like is affected by the news and by the media environment. And like it really like helps when there is like articles criticizing the government, journalists are saying, hey, we're not on the ball on this thing, that will get people's attention. And like I don't love that process, to be honest, because it shouldn't be like it should be like they should be driven by the evidence alone, and they shouldn't need that kick. But like if they're gonna have it, then like let's do it. Like
Yeah, no, it's so funny because like, lawmakers respond to the phones ringing in the office, and nothing makes the phones ring like something being on the news.
Exactly.
So it's like it's a part of the cycle of like awareness. But the journalists themselves, I think they don't want to be told they don't get it. I'm a reporter. I get everything. Like I've been doing this job for 20 years. You throw some shit at me, I read the press release and I go and I turn it into an article, and that's what I do. And like, there's no way, it's like everything else. Like people just have a very hard time accepting that this thing is fundamentally different from anything they've ever dealt with.
Yeah, I think, it's hard. And I think it needs, common stories, common language, common like sort of, real everyday like feel to it. I mean, I think there has been some really like good journalism already we've seen on AI, like the work that like Fox did on like bringing like whistleblowers to OpenAI to light, and they really brought that to the public's attention. And then policymakers, I mean, Congress, for example, has been like pushing OpenAI to provide protections for whistleblowers because of those concerns. And like who knows, like without journalists, like maybe no one in public and the political life would have noticed that. Like this happens, in various other cases, and no action happened, but it was because of the journalists who like spent that time, who really invested in it, that like we got that story. So like there is evidence that like it can be done. It just requires someone's like a bit of courage to be like, hey, I'm going to look at this properly. I'm going to really think about this. I'm going to talk to the right people. I'm going to bring this to like a wider audience.
Yeah. So interesting. So let's look to the future a little bit. Let's try to find some optimism here. So let's say like, if the next 6 months went incredibly well and we made big strides, what would that look like? What could that look like?
Yeah, I think I mean, there is so much we can do. It's like the one feeling I do come away with. I mean, on the work I mentioned with Founders Pledge, like we have all these like really exciting nonprofits and organizations working on these problems. Like if we're in 6 months' time, we had like fully funded their like budgets and we were really getting them to like into like the weeds of stuff, then we would be confident that like a bunch of positive things would happen. Policies would be passed. Like coordination would happen. Summits would be like going on between these companies, between these countries to talk about this issue, to take action, and then through that, like we get regulations, we get legislation, we get like the necessary steps to like mitigate these risks. Like the details are complicated. Like I won't like pretend otherwise. Like it is hard to get this right, even if you like really think it's a big problem. Like it's actually figuring out the solutions are hard. But I think like with enough time, enough investment, people, and money, like we can actually like make progress on like figuring out what we need to do and then actually doing it. So yeah, I think in 6 months' time, if there was UK legislation, if we had like the SB 1047 passed, if we had like something similar on the federal level, like there are lots of positive like things to aim for. And yeah, like it's also a thing that anyone can help with. Like it doesn't have to be just really smart people and technical AI people. It can be anyone, right? Like it doesn't have to be in this weird kind of AI community. And you don't have to have $1 billion, right? You don't have to anyone can donate, right? Anyone can make a small contribution, and it really doesn't matter. So yeah, that's what gives me some hope.
Awesome. Tom, this was fantastic. So super great to meet you. I'm really glad you are over there doing what you do. I wish you tremendous success in the future. Go get them, man.
Thank you.
Need
you
all
too.
the help we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, really appreciate you guys doing this podcast. I think it's like fantastic. I think getting the word out there to like, a wide audience is like so part of this story. So yeah, please keep doing that.
Is it too much to ask that there be a world where we know actually how the telephone tree of AI safety would work? That we know where the people at the lab would place the phone call when the bad thing happened to make the good thing stop the bad thing? No. That's too complicated. Forget it. We'll figure it out when we get there. That's literally what it is. Okay. So it's 2024. We don't know how long we have to live, so we live every day like it could be our last. We end every show with something we call a celebration of life, just something that makes us thrilled to be alive. Last week, the power duet of Leon Bridges and Maggie Rogers got me thinking along that line again this week. So we're going for another power duet. Here we have Beyonce and Ed Sheeran singing his song, Perfect. Okay, friends, please remember AI risk is not someone else's problem. It is yours and it is mine. Quoting Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, we are the only thing that ever has. For humanity, I'm John Sherman. I'll see you right back here next week for show number 52. See you then.